Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Crime Whisper, and I'm here to guide you through another chilling story. I know many of you use these videos to unwind or fall asleep, so before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, let me know in the comments where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now. Now, get comfortable, breathe deeply, let your body relax, and let's begin. Case 1. The Wakefield Abduction. The peaceful town of Wakefield, lined with old brick homes and quiet streets, a nightmare unfolded in 2011 that would scar the community forever. At the heart of this disturbing case was a man named Richard Halewood, a 43-year-old former truck driver. Richard was largely invisible in town. To neighbors, he was simply the quiet man who kept to himself. He had once worked in logistics, but a work-related injury had forced him into early retirement. After losing his job, Richard grew increasingly isolated. He rarely left his modest home, aside from the occasional solitary drive around the outskirts of town. But what no one knew, what no one could have imagined, was the darkness he was quietly harboring behind closed doors. Years earlier, Richard had a few brushes with the law, petty theft, minor fraud, even an alleged harassment case that never made it to trial, but he had always managed to stay just out of reach of serious consequences. Until now, the case that exposed him began one spring evening, when 14-year-old Eleanor Brooks vanished without a trace. Eleanor was a bright, well-liked girl from a loving home. She had a routine life: school, extracurriculars, and time with friends. Nothing unusual, that is, until the evening she didn't return home. Her parents were worried, but hopeful at first, assuming she may have lost track of time. They called her phone repeatedly, but it rang and rang. When the hours passed with no sign of her, panic set in. At first, authorities considered the possibility that Eleanor had run away, but she had no history of rebellion, no family disputes, and no reason to vanish voluntarily. Then came the first clue. Surveillance footage from a nearby petrol station showed a blurry image of Eleanor beside a rusted blue van. The van was later traced back to Richard Halewood. When questioned, Richard remained almost too calm. He denied everything, claiming his van had been stolen and that he was home all evening. But he had no solid alibi, and police were beginning to suspect much more than coincidence. A search warrant was issued. From the outside, Richard's home looked ordinary: a tidy yard, weathered siding, nothing out of place. But inside, it was a different story. The interior was dark, cluttered, and suffocating. Piles of old newspapers, food wrappers, and an unsettling array of chains and padlocks filled the rooms. Then officers noticed the reinforced basement door. Behind it, they made a chilling discovery: a small soundproofed room, and inside, huddled in a corner, was Eleanor Brooks. She was alive, terrified. Her hands were bound, and she had been held captive for 5 days. The space was barely large enough to move in. Eleanor's wide, exhausted eyes told investigators everything they needed to know about her ordeal. Richard was arrested on the spot, but he remained disturbingly composed, offering no remorse. He claimed he had been keeping her safe, but offered no explanation beyond that. As the investigation unfolded, darker truths emerged. Richard hadn't acted on impulse. He had been stalking Eleanor for weeks, watching her walk home from school, noting her routine. His internet search history revealed chilling interests: articles on past kidnappings, survivalist tactics, and ways to avoid detection. This had been premeditated, carefully calculated. The trial moved quickly, but it wasn't easy. Eleanor took the stand and, with remarkable strength, described her time in captivity: the silence, the fear, the way Richard spoke to her like they shared a delusional connection. The jury needed no convincing. Richard Halewood was sentenced to life in prison, but even with justice served, Wakefield was left shaken. Neighbors questioned everything. Had there been warning signs? Was there something they had missed in his quiet demeanor? And the horror didn't end there. When investigators continued their search through the home, they found something that deepened the mystery. Notebooks. Dozens of them. Inside were pages filled with observations, detailed logs of young girls in town, where they went after school, what time they got home, who they walked with. Some names were crossed out. Why had he moved on from them more? Had something worse happened? Then came the most chilling discovery. A drawer, locked tight. Inside a set of dusty old VHS tapes. The recordings were of Richard himself, speaking directly to the camera in a flat, unsettling tone. He rambled about his purpose, referring to the notebooks as his collection. He mentioned Eleanor by name months before she was taken. He didn't view himself as a criminal. In his twisted mind, he believed he was rescuing these girls from the dangers of the outside world. Eleanor eventually moved away, trying to leave the trauma behind. Her resilience was remarkable, though the scars of those 5 days would never truly fade. For the people of Wakefield, the case was a cruel awakening, a reminder that even in the calmest of towns, darkness can lurk just beneath the surface, and behind the quietest faces can hide the most terrifying secrets. Richard Halewood believed he was saving them. In his fractured mind, he saw himself as a protector shielding vulnerable girls from a world he claimed was broken, poisoned by corruption and danger. His words, captured in those old VHS tapes, were a chilling mix of delusion and meticulous planning. It was clear that Richard's mind had long surrendered to a darkness few could comprehend. Meanwhile, Eleanor Brooks was fighting her own invisible war. Though physically unharmed, the trauma left psychological wounds that ran deep. In the days following her rescue, she spoke very little. Her once bright personality had dimmed, replaced by a haunting stillness. Her parents, desperate to bring some semblance of normalcy back into their home, struggled to reach her. But how? Do you return to normal after something like this? As news of the case broke, the media descended on Wakefield. Reporters lined the streets. News vans broadcasted live from the front of Richard's home. Neighbors gave stunned interviews. Analysts debated his mental state. What was once a quiet town now found itself in the national spotlight, forever marked by one of the most disturbing cases in recent history. But while the public obsessed over the details, law enforcement was already looking deeper. Investigators began tracing Richard's movements over the past decade. What they found was deeply unsettling. He had traveled often, staying in budget motels and camping in remote rural areas. His bank records showed frequent purchases from hardware stores, chains, locks, heavy-duty plastic sheets. The evidence painted a chilling picture. Eleanor Brooks might not have been his only victim. The case widened. Authorities reopened cold files. Search teams began to comb through areas Richard had visited, and one name continued to surface again and again. Hannah Weller. She had vanished 7 years earlier from a nearby town, 16 years old. Her disappearance had been written off as a likely runaway. There were no leads. The trail had gone cold. Until now. Asterisk inside Richard's notebooks, those grim catalogs of surveillance and obsession. Her name appeared. So did her school route, her favorite coffee shop, even a hand-sketched likeness of her face. But unlike entry, Hannah's name had not been crossed out. Investigators searched Richard's house again, looking for any connection to Hannah. But there was nothing. No physical evidence, no belongings, no body, no confession. It was as if she had simply vanished. Then came the breakthrough. An officer, reviewing Richard's travel logs, noticed something strange: frequent visits to an old abandoned farmhouse on the outskirts of Wakefield. It was a place he had no clear connection to, a forgotten property, long since left to rot. A team was dispatched to investigate. The air inside was thick with dust. The wooden floor sagged beneath their boots, and in the basement, hidden behind a decaying door, was a room, small, claustrophobic, covered in blankets to muffle sound. It was almost identical to the one where Eleanor had been held. On the floor, half buried beneath dirt and debris, was a single silver necklace, a small crescent moon pendant, dulled by time. Hannah's parents identified it immediately. It had been a gift for her 15th birthday. She never took it off. The discovery reignited hope, but hope was quickly met by reality. Search teams scoured the farmhouse. Cadaver dogs were brought in. The surrounding woods, fields, even the stream nearby, everything was searched. But there were no remains, no other items, no signs of where she had gone. It was as if Richard had known they would come looking, just as he had planned. Abduction down to the finest detail, perhaps. He had also planned how to cover his tracks, as Richard stood trial for Eleanor's kidnapping. Prosecutors laid bare the extent of his planning and manipulation. His notebooks, his videotapes, his disturbing desire to control. The jury didn't need long to deliberate. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But for Hannah's family, the verdict offered no closure. Richard remained silent on the subject of Hannah Weller, and the question haunted them: was she still out there, hidden away in another forgotten place, or had she met a fate too grim to imagine? The farmhouse became a symbol, a monument of uncertainty. Journalists visited, amateur sleuths camped outside. Speculation ran wild, but no new evidence surfaced. As the years passed, the case slipped quietly from headlines. But for Alana Brooks, the trauma never left. After years of therapy, she relocated, changed her name, and tried to rebuild her life. But the memories lingered. Flashes of the darkened room, the sound of Richard's slow, deliberate footsteps, the faint hum of the outside world just beyond the locked walls. Some nights, she awoke breathless, convinced he had escaped, that he was coming for her again. The fear, though irrational, was real, invisible scars she would carry for the rest of her life. And for Hannah Weller's family, time brought no answers. 7 years had passed, despite the necklace, despite the farmhouse. Nothing else was ever found. Search parties had combed every corner of that land. They'd dredged rivers, dug old wells, used thermal imaging to scan beneath the soil. But Hannah had vanished. Her parents, Robert and Mary Weller, never gave up hope. Each year they made public appeals, their faces weary, their voices trembling. They held on to the belief that she was still alive, hidden somewhere, waiting. During Richard's early years in prison, journalists and investigators made repeated attempts to speak with him. Some said he relished the attention, smiling when pressed for details, feigning memory loss when asked about Hannah. Others believed he was simply playing a game, relishing the last bit of power he held. The power to withhold the one truth the world so desperately needed. One detective, who had worked the case since the very beginning, decided to visit Richard once more. Wakefield. Final revelation in prison. The detective visited Richard Halewood regularly. He tried everything: resin, anger, sympathy. But no matter the tactic, Richard's reply was always the same: some things are better left undiscovered. And so, the years passed. Hannah Weller's name became just another entry on the growing list of unsolved disappearances in the UK. The world moved on, but her parents never did. Then, nearly a decade after she vanished, an unexpected breakthrough emerged, and it all began with fire. A small group of urban explorers had ventured into the abandoned farmhouse where Hannah's necklace had once been found. The place had become infamous, a haunted landmark in local lore, a place that felt cursed. Inside, the air was heavy, the silence unbearable. They filmed their journey as motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight, whispering their thoughts as they explored Richard Halewood's decaying world. Then, one of them knocked over an old oil lantern. The fire spread fast. Dry wood, rotting. Walls. Years of forgotten debris. Everything ignited. Thick smoke rose into the sky. By the time firefighters arrived, the farmhouse was nearly gone. The explorers survived. but the structure that had once hidden so much darkness had been reduced to smoking rubble, and that's when they found it. Beneath the remains, buried under the collapsed kitchen floor, firefighters uncovered something long hidden, a sealed route, cellar, its entrance disguised for years. It was a narrow tunnel, descending deep into the earth. Forensic teams were called in immediately. They moved slowly, carefully, documenting each step. What they found at the bottom shook even the most seasoned detectives. A hidden chamber, no more than 10 feet across. Concrete walls, roughly modified. Rusted chains bolted to the ceiling. In the corner, a filthy mattress rotting on the floor. The air was stale, but it carried something else. A weight, a presence, a sense of suffering that lingered like smoke. And in that far corner, partially buried beneath old fabric and dirt, they found the bones, curled, fragile, and still. DNA tests would later confirm what many had already feared. The remains were Hannah Weller's. The discovery devastated her parents. Years of hoping, of imagining a reunion that might still happen, collapsed into a grief almost too heavy to bear. But at least the wondering was over. No more sleepless nights asking whether she was still suffering somewhere. No more silence. Richard Halewood, now elderly and frail, was told the news. He only smiled. "You had to burn the past to finally see the truth," he said. No apology, no explanation. Just one last cryptic sentence to deepen the horror. With Hannah's remains recovered, the case was finally closed. Richard would die in prison, taking with him any other secrets he refused to speak. The farmhouse was gone, but the scars it left would linger in Wakefield soil forever. For Eleanor Brooks, the discovery of Hannah's fate was a chilling reminder of how close she had come to sharing the same ending. She had worked hard to reclaim her life, to silence the shadows. But even now, in the quietest hours of night, the memories crept back. And sometimes, when sleep refused to come, she found herself wondering, how many others had there been? Was Richard telling the truth when he said some things were better left undiscovered? Or were there still more secrets waiting beneath the soil, still waiting to be unearthed? Case 2. The Houston disappearance. The air in Houston, Texas was thick with humidity. That late summer evening in 2011, the city buzzed with energy. Neon signs flickered over convenience stores, car horns echoed in the distance, and people made their way home in the fading light. But in a quiet suburb on the city's outskirts, something far more sinister was quietly unfolding. At the center of this case was a man named Dwayne Collister, 47 years old. A quiet, unassuming auto mechanic, polite, if distant, often seen mowing his lawn or tinkering under the hood of a car in his driveway. His modest single-story house was surrounded by a high wooden facade for a man who lived alone. What his neighbors didn't know was that behind that fence and beneath the garage was a hidden basement, a place no one had ever seen, a place not listed on any city inspection or property record. Dwayne had spent years preparing it, and in August of 2011, he finally used it. On the evening of August 14th, a 14-year-old girl named Emily Prescott disappeared. She had been riding her bicycle home from a friend's house, a 15-minute trip she'd made dozens of times before, but that night she never arrived. Her parents, James and Lyndon, knew something was wrong almost immediately. Emily was careful, responsible. She always checked in, always answered her phone. But that night, her calls went straight to voicemail. Her father got in the car, retracing her usual route, headlights scanning the sidewalks. No sign of her, no bicycle, no backpack, no phone. By midnight, a missing persons report was filed. Police acted fast. They knew that every passing hour reduced the odds of finding her safely. Surveillance footage was pulled from local businesses. At 8:37 p.m., a liquor store camera showed Emily riding past. Just minutes later, another camera captured a dark-colored pickup truck idling near a residential intersection. Emily's figure was seen in the distance, under a dim streetlight. Then the truck moved forward. Brake lights flared, and the vehicle vanished into the night. That truck was registered to Dwayne Collister. What no one knew at the time, what no one could have guessed, was that Emily Prescott was now trapped in a nightmare. Inside Dwayne's house, under that tall, wooden fence, she had been taken to the hidden basement he'd spent years constructing. It was small, cramped. The walls were thick with soundproof insulation. A single flickering light bulb hung from the ceiling. The floor was bare concrete. One mattress. One locked steel door. Dwayne went to work the next morning as if nothing had happened. Fixed cars, had lunch at his usual diner, chatted with a neighbor about the heat. But beneath the calm, a storm was forming. Dwayne had planned the abduction, but he hadn't planned for the panic. Emily's disappearance made headlines. Her face appeared on every news channel, every street corner, every screen. And as law enforcement closed in, the illusion of control that Dwayne had so carefully maintained began to crack. Dwayne Collister always knew he couldn't keep her forever, but letting her go, that was never an option. Down in the hidden basement, time lost all meaning. The air was heavy with mildew and silence broken only by the flickering of a dim yellow bulb overhead. Emily Prescott had screamed the first night, cried, until her voice cracked, pounded her fists against the steel door until her knuckles bled, but no one came. No one could hear her. Above ground, the world moved on, and so did Dwayne. Each morning he woke at dawn, brewed his usual bitter black coffee, and drove to work in the same pickup truck that had swallowed Emily whole. He rotated tires, replaced carburetors, and forced polite laughs with co-workers. A model of routine, a man with no reason to be watched, but inside, panic pulsed just beneath the surface. On every newsstand, on every channel, Emily's smile stared back, brown eyes bright with youth. A 14-year-old girl who vanished near Sycamore Street. Over 72 hours missing. Dwayne's skin prickled every time her name was spoken on air. The walls of his mind began to close in, mirroring the cramped hell below his garage floor. Each night, when the world around him hushed, he'd sneak down the creaky wooden stairs, lift the hidden trapdoor, and descend into darkness. By then, Emily had stopped screaming. She knew it was useless. She no longer begged. Instead, she just watched him, his hollow body curled into the farthest corner of the room. Dwayne brought her food without a word, bottled water, cold sandwiches, the occasional bruised apple. When he did speak, it was stiff, if reading lines from a script that no longer made sense. He had told himself this was what he wanted, that this was control. But Emily was not some fantasy. She was real, and she was watching him. Back in the world that still hoped Emily's parents were unraveling, her mother, Linda, hadn't slept in days. Her father, James, once a man of calm reason, had become a hollowed-out shell. He drove 4 hours, searching alleys and overpasses, asking questions no one could answer. Police set up a command post in the neighborhood. Search parties combed through every wooded lot, every empty building. The community lit candles, prayed, hoped, and then, on the 5th night, there was a break. A woman named Rachel Simmons was working the late shift at a gas station when she noticed a man come in just after midnight. He bought bottled water, bread, granola bars, nothing strange. But something about him, the way he kept glancing over his shoulder, the way he avoided eye contact, made her uneasy. Rachel couldn't shake the feeling. Later, she reviewed the security footage. Her stomach dropped. The man had been driving a dark-colored pickup truck. It looked like the same vehicle captured in grainy surveillance from the night of Emily's disappearance. And crucially, a partial license plate was visible by morning. Detectives were knocking on Dwayne Collister's front door. He played the part, casual, helpful, confused. But when they asked to inspect his truck, a flicker of tension crossed his face. The truck looked ordinary, dusty, worn, but the officers were thorough. Gloved hands traced every surface, and then they saw it. Strands of long, light brown hair, tangled in the passenger seat. Dwayne's breath caught. He offered a weak excuse, said he'd picked up a stranded motorist, but the investigators didn't buy it. The truck was seized. A warrant was issued. The search moved inside. The house was unsettlingly clean. Too clean. Then, in the garage, an officer noticed scuff marks on the floorboards near the tool bench. The boards didn't sit right. He knelt down, felt the seams and called for backup. A crowbar cracked the wood apart. Beneath it, a heavy metal trapdoor, locked from the outside. Every officer in that garage already knew what they'd find. Their hands trembled as they twisted the latch. The smell hit first stale, damp, unbearable, and then curled up in the darkness. Eyes wide and blinking was Emily Prescott alive. The news exploded. Reporters swarmed the street as officers led Dwayne Collister out in handcuffs. A community's nightmare had found its face. Emily was rushed to the hospital, dehydrated, frail but alive. Her mother collapsed into sobs. Her father couldn't let go of her hand. Dwayne was charged with kidnapping, unlawful confinement, and a list of felonies that would ensure he never saw daylight again. His careful illusion of normalcy shattered beyond repair. He sat silent in the interrogation room, hands cuffed, eyes empty. But his silence no longer mattered. Emily had survived, and for the first time in days, the darkness had lost case 2. Emily Prescott, the basement prisoner. Detectives, reporters, and loved ones surrounded her. But for Emily Prescott, the world hadn't truly changed. Inside, she remained frozen in time, trapped in the same small, suffocating basement where she had spent nearly a week of her young life. Her parents hardly left her side. Linda clung to Emily's hand like a lifeline, terrified that if she let go, Emily might disappear again. James, once the unshakable rock of the family, was now unraveling at the seams. A familiar song on the radio, the sight of Emily's untouched breakfast plate. Even the quiet rhythm of her breathing at night could bring him to tears. Emily was home. She was safe. But safe didn't mean the nightmare was over. Sleep became her enemy. Every time she closed her eyes, she was back in that dark, windowless room. She could still see the flickering light bulb, still hear the muffled footsteps creaking above her. She could feel the coarse blanket against her skin, smell the damp concrete, and hear the trapdoor creak open. Each sound a trigger, each night a battle. Therapists called it PTSD. They told her it would take time. But time, to Emily, felt cruel. Days stretched endlessly, while the nights swallowed her whole, dragging her back to a place she desperately wanted to escape. Meanwhile, the outside world was consumed by the trial of Dwayne Collister. The quiet town of Bastrop, Texas had become the focus of national media. News vans crowded the courthouse steps. Protesters waved signs demanding justice. Strangers who had never met Emily spoke her name with reverence, but Dwayne Collister said nothing. From the moment of his arrest, he refused to speak. No confession, no apology. His lawyers claimed he was mentally unwell, that his actions were the result of instability. But the evidence painted a far more chilling picture. A man who had planned everything. The abduction, the basement, every detail of the nightmare. The prosecution laid out their case with brutal precision. Photos of the secret room, forensic reports linking Emily's fingerprints and hair to Dwayne's truck, neighbor testimonies placing him near the school the day she vanished. And then came the moment no one could forget. Emily's testimony. She had rehearsed it for days, preparing with her attorney, trying to steel herself, but nothing could prepare her for the weight of that courtroom. The air was heavy with tension, every eye fixed on her. Her hands gripped the wooden rail, knuckles white, as she looked across the room and met Dwayne's gaze. He wasn't the towering figure from the basement anymore. He was caged now, dressed in an orange jumpsuit, small and pathetic. Emily spoke. She told the court everything. The fear, The isolation. The cold nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she'd ever see sunlight again. She described how Dwayne brought her food without emotion, how he watched her, silent, as though she were not a person, but an object he owned. In the gallery, her mother sobbed quietly into her hands. James sat stone-faced, his grip firm on Linda's shoulder, eyes locked on the man who had stolen their daughter. The defense dared to suggest that maybe Dwayne had meant no harm, that perhaps he had been lonely and misguided, but the prosecutors shut it down. Kidnapping is not an act of loneliness. Locking a child in a basement is not a mistake, it's a crime, and we are here to make sure that crime does not go unpunished. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Dwayne Collister was sentenced to life in prison, no parole, no second chances. The world would move on without him, just as he had tried to erase Emily from hers. But justice, well served, didn't erase the trauma. Emily tried to return to normal. She went back to school, though whispers followed her through the hallways. Teachers tiptoed around her, treating her like glass. Friends fumbled their words, unsure of how to approach her. She began therapy, learning how to manage the nightmares and flashbacks. She started journaling, pouring the pain onto paper, trying to keep it from consuming her. Bit by bit, she reclaimed her life. Emily enrolled in a local self-defense class not because she wanted to fight, but because she never wanted to feel powerless again. She began speaking at community events, raising awareness about missing children, using her voice to help others who had none. Years passed. The girl once hidden in a dark basement became a woman who refused to live in its shadow. She graduated high school with honors. She studied psychology in college, determined to help survivors like herself. The memories never fully faded, lingering at the edges of her mind, but she refused to let them win. Because Emily Prescott wasn't just a victim. She was a survivor. About 10 miles outside of town, tucked away in the middle of nowhere, stood a decaying barn. One witness, a woman who had called in a tip, remembered it. Clearly, she told the dispatcher, "There's nothing out there but empty land." But what stuck with her most was the sound she'd heard, of faint, high-pitched crying that she convinced herself must have been an animal. Still, she reported it. Authorities took the tip seriously. The next morning, a convoy of police cruisers rolled down forgotten dirt roads and overgrown fields. The barn barely stood upright, its wooden frame splintered, the roof sagging inward. From the outside, it looked abandoned. Inside was a different story. Past rotting boards and scattered debris. In the darkest corner of the barn, they found her, Sarah Monroe. She was alive, curled tightly against the wall. Her body was frail, bruised, her clothes torn and filthy. When the officers called her name, she lifted her head. The moment her terrified eyes met theirs, she broke down in silent sobs. She was too weak to stand, but as soon as they reached her, she clung to them like she was afraid they might vanish. The barn reeked of damp earth, rust, and something else. Something sickly sweet and decaying. Nearby was a dirty mattress, a flickering camping lantern, and a length of rope tossed to the side. One look at the scene told officers everything. Sarah had been held here, hidden away for days. If they'd arrived just a day later, the outcome might have been tragically different. Back in Enid, news of Sarah's rescue spread fast, and so did the search for Daniel Whitaker. Police descended on his house. His truck sat in the driveway, keys still in the ignition, as if he had left in a rush. Inside, the place felt more like a shell than a home, bare rooms. Sparse furniture, the kind of emptiness that suggested no real life had ever been lived there. But the deeper they looked, the worse it got. In a drawer in his bedroom dresser, they found a stack of newspaper clippings, reports of missing girls from other towns. Some had been found, some had vanished without a trace. All were young. All bore an eerie resemblance to Sarah. Then, in the kitchen, they found it, a notebook. Its pages were filled with chaotic handwriting, frantic, unraveling, thoughts, fantasies, plans. At first it read like a journal, but as they turned the pages, it became darker. It wasn't just a record of Sarah's abduction, it was a descent, a history of a man standing on the edge of darkness for years. He wrote about urges he couldn't control, girls he'd watched, girls he'd followed, and worse, what he wanted to do next. They needed to find him. Sarah's statement was vital. Detectives approached with care, knowing her trauma was fresh. She described the moment Danny pulled up beside her in his truck, offering a ride. She'd declined, so he drove ahead, parked and waited. Before she realized what was happening, he was behind her, pressing a rag to her face. Darkness followed. She woke up in the barn, bound, alone. He came and went, bringing her food and water, saying very little. The only words he ever spoke were warnings. No one would find her, no one would hear her, and if she tried to escape, there would be consequences. Sarah believed him. Every word as she recovered in the hospital, the manhunt expanded. Danny had no close friends, no nearby relatives, no known hideouts. Then came a tip from a truck stop an hour outside town. A gas station clerk remembered him disheveled, paying in cash, asking if they sold burner phones. By the time police arrived, he was gone. The next 48 hours were tense. His face appeared on every news channel. Roadblocks went up, patrols doubled, and then another tip. Smoke, in the woods, near the Kansas border. A park ranger had seen a fire and an abandoned car deep in the trees. Law enforcement moved in, weapons, drawn boots crunching over leaves. There he was. Danny Whitaker sat against a tree, staring at the flames. He didn't run, didn't speak. He simply raised his hands, as if he'd been waiting. His final words before arrest were bone-chilling in their simplicity. I wasn't finished. Enid exhaled. Parents clutched their children tighter. Trust was thinner. But Sarah Monroe was home. Forever changed but home. In the evidence locker sat Danny's notebook, filled with questions no one wanted to answer. His trial became one of the most watched cases in Oklahoma's recent history. At first, the town felt relief, but as the truth came out, relief turned to horror. Digging into Danny's past revealed a deeply disturbing pattern. As a handyman, he'd moved between towns, slipping in and out of homes unnoticed. His quiet demeanor had helped him stay invisible. But then came the most horrifying discovery yet. In a locked drawer in his garage, police found dozens of old VHS tapes and USB drives. The contents were never made public. Investigators who viewed them confirmed the worst. Some tapes showed young women and girls being followed, filmed without their knowledge. Others showed rooms like the barn victims waiting, frightened, with no escape. Some had survived. Others were never identified. Sarah's testimony was crucial. Though still healing, she stood strong in court. She described everything from the moment he took her to the days she spent locked away. When she spoke, Danny sat in silence. No reaction, no remorse. Only when the recordings played did he seem to shift, his jaw clenched. His fingers twitched, but he said nothing. Then came the notebook. Passages were read aloud, his writings on power, planning, and the thrill of control. Names, details, girls he considered, but didn't take. Fantasies that became reality. The jury deliberated for just 3 hours. Guilty, on all counts. Danny Whitaker was sentenced to life without parole. He would never walk free again, never hurt anyone else. But for Sarah Monroe, the people of Enid, the scars would linger. Years later, Sarah chose to speak out. She became an advocate for survivors of abduction and trauma, using her story to help others find their strength. Though nightmares still came, she refused to let them define her. And Danny Whitaker, he faded into infamy, a ghost behind bars. But his notebook still sits in evidence, a chilling reminder of just how far someone can fall when no one's watching. Case for the summer of 1997 settled over Melbourne with an uneasy tension. Crime was on the rise, and though no one knew it at the time, a single night would soon plunge the city into one of its darkest chapters. At the center of it all was Daniel Danny Whitmore, a name that would come to symbolize fear, regret, and a failed system. Danny was 34, average, forgettable, the kind of man who could disappear in a crowd. He had short sandy brown hair, deep-set blue eyes, and a lean, worn body of a former athlete whose life had taken too many wrong turns. Raised in Melbourne's rougher suburbs, Danny knew crime not as an exception, but as a lifestyle. His rap sheet was long, but filled mostly with petty offenses: burglary, fraud, small-time theft. He'd served time, but never long, always slipping through the cracks. But in 1997, something in him shifted. Petty crime no longer satisfied him. The rush was fading. He wanted more money, more risk, more power. And that hunger would lead to a night that would change everything. It began with a plan. Danny recruited two men: Ryan Brooks, 29, impulsive, volatile, and violent, and Stephen Carter, a 41-year-old ex-security guard turned criminal. Their target, an armored cash transport van. The plan was textbook: intercept the van at a busy shopping center, overpower the guards, grab the cash, and disappear before police could respond. They chose a Thursday night in early December, just before Christmas, when deposits were high and foot traffic was constant. For weeks they studied the van's route, exit maps, guard patterns. They acquired pistols and a sawn-off shotgun from the black market. Danny had one rule: violence only as a last resort. Ryan laughed at that rule. Stephen moved fast, seizing the cash bags from the second guard, who had abandoned them in a panic. Shoppers screamed and ducked behind cars. What was meant to be a robbery had become a bloodbath. And just like that, Danny realized this wasn't just theft. It was murder, and there would be no coming back. The air reeked of gunpowder and hot pavement. The injured guard lay motionless in a pool of dark blood. The second guard, though terrified, had managed to crawl behind a car and reach for his radio. They had planned for a lot: police response times, escape routes, decoys, but not this. The faint sound of sirens grew louder. "Move," Danny barked, shoving open the sedan's door. Ryan ran, still laughing, high on adrenaline. Stephen slid into the back seat, the bags clenched in shaking hands. Danny jumped behind the wheel, heart pounding, hands slick with sweat. He turned. The engine roared to life, just as red and blue lights lit up the entrance of the lot. "Hold on," he shouted, flooring the accelerator. The sedan screeched across the concrete, dodging carts and panicked pedestrians. A police cruiser blocked the main exit. An officer stepped out, gun raised, yelling commands. Danny didn't slow down. At the last moment, he swerved, clipping the cruiser's rear and sending their car fishtailing. He gritted his teeth, muscled the wheel, and kept them moving. More sirens, more cops' helicopters would be in the air within minutes. Every exit out of Melbourne would be locked down. They needed to vanish fast. "We're legends, man," Ryan shouted from the passenger seat, wild-eyed and grinning. "Did you see that?" "Shut up," Danny snapped, voice raw. "You just shot a cop. This isn't a movie. Ryan, we're screwed." Ryan sneered, but said nothing. Stephen leaned forward, breath shallow. "We need a plan. We can't just drive forever." Danny nodded. They had a second vehicle stashed outside the city, an old pickup truck hidden in a friend's abandoned shed. If they made it there, they had a chance. But luck wasn't on their side. Up ahead, a roadblock was already forming, cops with rifles, stepping into position. There would be no negotiation. Danny spun the wheel, hard right, barely missing a street lamp. The sedan's tires screamed. Ryan slammed into the dash with a curse. "Where are you going?" Stephen shouted. The docks, Danny growled. We ditch the car and disappear. The port of Melbourne was a maze. Shipping containers, warehouses, storage yards. It was their best shot at vanishing, even for just a while. Behind them, flashing lights surged closer. Danny drove like a man possessed, weaving through traffic, running lights, cutting sharp turns. Anything to shake the tail, anything to survive. He could feel the sweat sliding down his neck. His pulse thundered in his ears. The plan had fallen apart. The city was closing in, but for now, they had one shot left, the chaos of the docks, and Danny wasn't ready to give up just yet. The scent of salt and diesel filled the air as they tore through the industrial maze shipping yards. Cranes and rows of metal containers blurring past. Danny slammed the brakes near an abandoned loading. "Bay out," he barked. The three men spilled out of the car. Danny quickly wiped the steering wheel clean of prints and slammed the door shut. It wouldn't stop the police, but it might slow them down. Ryan spun in place, wide-eyed. Now what? Danny scanned the port. There had to be another way out. A truck, a storage container, a boat. Then he saw it. A massive cargo ship at the far end of the dock. Its floodlights cut through the evening haze. Workers bustled on deck, loading crates and equipment. It was a long shot, but if they could get on board before the cops closed in, they might just vanish. The wail of sirens grew louder, snapping Danny back to reality. They had seconds. He broke into a run, boots slamming against the concrete, lungs burning from the cold, salty air. Stephen followed close behind, his grip white-knuckled around the duffel bags stuffed with stolen cash. Ryan reckless, as always was, already sprinting ahead, his blood still buzzing from the heist. Behind them, patrol cars screamed to a halt at the edge of the port. Red and blue lights ricocheted off metal shipping containers. Officers poured out, weapons drawn, shouting commands Danny didn't bother to hear. There was no going back. The cargo ship loomed larger with each step, its navy blue hull chipped and rusting. Dock workers in reflective vests shouted to one another over the hum of heavy equipment, completely unaware of the chaos unfolding just beyond the shadows. Danny caught Stephen's eye. "The ship," he mouthed. Stephen nodded and shifted, the weight of the cash. Ryan didn't wait. He vaulted over a stack of crates, nearly colliding with a startled dock worker who cursed in confusion. Danny and Stephen darted after him, weaving through forklifts and towering metal walls. Crouching low, gunshots cracked in the distance. Danny ducked behind a container, flinching. Warning shots maybe but too close for comfort. He risked a glance. Officers had formed a perimeter near the abandoned getaway car, sweeping the dock with flashlights and drawn sidearms. "We need to get on that ship now," Stephen hissed. Danny's voice was low but firm. "Stay low. Move fast." They bolted. Again, slipping through shadows cast by cranes and crates. The gangway leading to the cargo ship was just ahead, guarded only by a dock worker glued to his clipboard. Ryan didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, grabbed the man by the collar, and shoved him into a pile of netting. The worker yelped, dazed. The three fugitives stormed the gangway. The deck was a maze of containers, piping, crates, and industrial noise. Crewmen moved in the half-light, their faces weary from long shifts, unaware that three desperate men were now among them. They needed cover, fast. Danny's mind raced. They couldn't be seen, not here, not like this. Ryan spotted it first, a half-open hatch near the aft section. Without a word, he slipped inside. Stephen followed, still clutching the cash. Danny brought up the rear and pulled the hatch closed. Behind them, darkness swallowed them. The air was damp, thick with the scent of rust and oil. Condensation dripped from steel pipes overhead. The ship's engines rumbled through the metal walls, vibrating in their bones. For now, they were hidden. Danny leaned back against the cold steel, catching his breath, muscles screaming from the chase. But he knew this wasn't over. The ship wouldn't stay docked for long. Once the police figured it out, the whole port would be shut down. Stephen gently set the money down. His hands were still trembling. What now? Danny didn't have an answer. Ryan, ever the gambler, grinned in the darkness. "We ride it out," he said. "Wherever this thing's going by, the time they realize we're gone, we'll be in international waters." It was reckless. It was madness. But it might be their only way out. Danny closed his eyes and listened to the murmur of footsteps above. The churn of the ship's engines, the sound of a world slowly leaving them behind. He'd made 1,000 bad decisions. Maybe this was just one more. Or maybe it was the one that would finally set him free. KCIV in the heart of Tegucigalpa, Honduras' city, where colonial architecture brushes shoulders with modern chaos, where the heat clings to every alleyway, like a second skin a shadow, was preparing to descend. It was the summer of 2014. The streets bustled with the usual rhythm of open markets, honking taxis, and street vendors shouting over radios. But beneath the city's colorful facade, something far darker was about to unfold. *A. Kidnapping. 1. That would rattle the foundations of a tightly woven community and expose a man whose quiet existence had concealed a far more sinister truth. His name was Miguel Mikey Salazar, born in 1978 on the outskirts of the city. At first glance, his life was entirely ordinary, lean, reserved, and polite. Mikey worked as a courier for a local business, spending his days weaving through traffic to deliver packages. He was known for being reliable, quiet, a little distant, but never suspicious. Yet behind that calm exterior was a man shaped by pain. His father, once a skilled artisan, had been broken by alcohol after tragedy struck the family. His mother toiled endlessly at a textile mill just to keep the lights on. Mikey grew up bitter, driven, desperate to escape the life he'd inherited. Over time, he dabbled in petty crimes, small scams, minor thefts, occasional outbursts of violence. But nothing in his past hinted at what he would one day become, the mastermind of one of the most chilling abductions Tegucigalpa had ever seen. On the night of August 21, 2014, that mask of normalcy would finally slip. Case 3, the disappearance of Carolina Ina Reyes. Carolina Ina Reyes was a bright 19-year-old university student with her entire future stretching ahead of her. Known for her brilliant smile and sharp intellect, she had grown up in one of Tegucigalpa's modest, middle-class neighborhoods. Her days were spent immersed in lectures, long study sessions at the university library, and relaxed evenings with friends at the vibrant cafes lining the city's historic streets. That night had been no different, or so it seemed. After wrapping up a late study session, Carolina began her usual walk home. Her route was familiar, a winding path through narrow, mural-covered streets, lit only by scattered street lamps and the soft hum of nightlife. But what she didn't know was that someone had been watching. Miguel Salazar had been tracking her movements for weeks. He studied her from a distance like a predator mapping his prey. His fascination wasn't just curiosity, was an obsession rooted in bitterness and a warped need for dominance. In his mind, Carolina wasn't just a student. She was a symbol of everything he had been denied: youth, ambition, promise. And on that night, his twisted plan was finally set in motion. Carolina vanished without a trace after passing a quiet intersection near a local market. When she didn't return home and her parents couldn't reach her, concern quickly turned into panic. The city's pulse shifted. By sunrise, flyers bearing her photos were being circulated. Her name repeated in urgent tones across radio stations and social media. At first, authorities treated it like a routine disappearance. Maybe she'd gone somewhere unexpectedly, or gotten caught in the chaos of city life. But as detectives reviewed grainy CCTV footage and interviewed nearby vendors, a disturbing narrative began to emerge. In one clip, Carolina was seen walking briskly, just minutes before she vanished. Behind her, a dark sedan crept along the curb near a deserted parking lot. The image was unclear, but a faint outline of a man could be made. Outline build, leather jacket, cap pulled low over his face. Even through the poor resolution, the intensity of his gaze was unmistakable. By now, the investigation had shifted into overdrive. Search teams combed alleyways and abandoned buildings. Theories swirled, and whispers of a planned abduction spread across the city. Local informants recalled other disappearances dismissed at the time as isolated incidents. But this wasn't coincidence. This was intentional, calculated, evil, far from the chaos. In a modest apartment on the city's outskirts, Miguel Salazar had prepared for this moment with chilling precision. Behind a false wall in his living room, he had built a secret chamber at first, a strange hobby, now repurposed into a cell. Carolina was his prisoner, in that cold windowless space, lit by a single flickering bulb. She lay on the concrete floor, wrists bound. At first, she screamed, cried, begged, but the thick walls muffled everything. The restraints were too tight. Days passed. No sun, no clocks. Just silence and Miguel's footsteps. Back in the city, the Reyes family was living a nightmare. Eduardo, Carolina's father, was a respected textile businessman. Her mother, Valeria, was a beloved elementary school teacher. Their grief wasn't private anymore, it was televised, analyzed, and shared by a horrified public. This wasn't just a missing persons case. Carolina had become the heart of a citywide reckoning. Volunteers flooded in. Posters covered walls. Hashtags trended. And yet, Miguel Salazar remained invisible. He still went to work. Still nodded to neighbors. Still played the role of an ordinary man in a decaying apartment. No one suspected that just beyond his thin walls, a teenager was living. In fear and darkness, he watched the news coverage from his worn-out chair, studying every detail with eerie calm. His fingers tapped the armrest, while Carolina's photo flashed on screen. The world believed this was about money, that surely a ransom demand would come. But Miguel wanted no money. This wasn't a kidnapping for gain. It was a twisted quest for power. To him, Carolina was everything he wasn't. Her light only highlighted his darkness. In capturing her, he believed he could rewrite the story of his life, one where he had control, where he wasn't invisible. Inside that hidden room, Carolina clung to hope with every fiber of her being. The bulb above her head dimmed and buzzed. The air was thick and stale. She didn't know who had taken her or why, but she refused to give up. Her will to live burned beneath the terror. She remembered her mother's voice, her father's laugh, the smell of morning coffee at her favorite cafe, the pages of her textbooks, her dreams of becoming a lawyer. Miguel had stolen her freedom, but he hadn't broken her spirit. The days would continue to pass. Investigators were getting closer, and the truth long buried in shadows was about to break into the light. The hidden room, Miguel Salazar, was methodically every step of the abduction planned with chilling precision. He left no trace, no clue that could link him to Carolina's disappearance. From a distance, he watched the investigation unfold, almost entertained by the frantic voices of detectives chasing shadows. They were looking in all the wrong places. But Miguel made one crucial miscalculation. Carolina's father, Eduardo Reyes, was not a man who accepted defeat, especially not when his daughter's life was at stake. He threw everything he had into the search. He hired private investigators, pressured the police relentlessly, and even offered a substantial reward for any information. The city stirred. Tips poured in. Then came the break. A street vendor near the intersection where Carolina vanished remembered something. 88 dark sedan, creeping slowly through traffic that night, headlights dimmed. At first, the detail had seemed irrelevant, lost in the chaos of Tegucigalpa's night. But now, Under renewed scrutiny, it stood out. The vendor's vague description, a lean man, average height, a worn leather jacket, was enough to ignite a fresh round of investigation. Detectives re-examined surveillance footage with renewed intensity, and there it was in grainy footage from a convenience store camera, a dark sedan gliding down the street, moments before Carolina disappeared. Part of the license plate was visible. It wasn't much, but it was something. When they ran the partial plate, one name surfaced, Miguel Salazar. His record was clean on the surface. No major crimes, only minor infractions. But buried in his file were red flags, unsettling complaints from former co-workers, an old accusation from a woman who claimed he had followed her home. A weak lead, but in a case like this, any lead was worth chasing. When police knocked on Miguel's door, he greeted them calmly. His apartment was immaculate. He played the role of an ordinary man effortlessly, feigning confusion at their questions. He denied owning a dark sedan, denied being anywhere near the scene. His alibi was shaky, but not dismissibl. As the officers prepared to leave, one of them noticed something, a faint draft near a section of the wall. The air was still, yet something stirred. The shift in their expressions did not go unnoticed. Miguel tried to mask his panic with a nervous laugh, but it was too late. They forced open the hidden door. Inside, huddled in the dim light, was Carolina Reyes. For a breathless second, there was silence. In chaos, Miguel bolted, but he didn't get far. Officers tackled him before he reached the door. Carolina was alive. Word of her rescue spread like wildfire. Her family's relief was indescribable. The city of Tegucigalpa rejoiced. Miguel, on the other hand, was hauled away in cuffs, his twisted facade crumbling. As authorities combed through his apartment, they uncovered the extent of his obsession. Detailed notes on Carolina's routines, newspaper clippings of other unsolved disappearances. Suddenly, questions emerged. Had Miguel done this before? Nothing directly tied him to other missing persons, but the implications were chilling. Investigators delved into his past. He had grown up in poverty, abandoned by his mother, neglected by alcoholic relatives, a quiet, withdrawn man. Co-workers remembered him for his unsettling stares, the way his presence lingered. Women, in particular, recalled moments that made their skin crawl. But he had always flown just under the radar until now. Among his belongings, they found journals, pages filled with obsessive notes. Dozens of women, their lives reduced to bullet points, their routines mapped, their habits memorized. This wasn't a spontaneous crime. It was practiced, rehearsed, perhaps repeated. As prosecutors built their case, more evidence surfaced. Miguel Salazar wasn't just a kidnapper, he was a predator who had spent years hiding in plain sight. Aftermath and trial for Carolina Reyes. The nightmare didn't end with her rescue. Though she survived, the trauma lingered. Sleep became elusive. Fear clung to her like a shadow. She flinched at sudden sounds, avoided the streets she once walked without fear. Her family surrounded her with love, therapy, security. But healing takes time. The whispers followed her, the looks, the pity. She had become a symbol of survival, but also of tragedy. And yet Carolina refused to remain a victim. She returned to university. Slowly, steadily, she reclaimed her life. She connected with other survivors. She found strength in solidarity. And when the trial began, she faced Miguel in court. The room was packed with reporters, legal experts, and a public that had followed every twist of the story. Miguel sat silently, his demeanor eerily calm as prosecutors painted him for what he truly was. Carolina took the stand, her hands trembling, but her voice steady. She told her story, and the jury listened. His defense tried to play the sympathy card: mental illness, a troubled childhood. But the evidence was undeniable. When the verdict came guilty on all counts, the courtroom erupted. Some cheered, others wept. Miguel Salazar was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice had been served, but for Carolina, true justice wasn't just about Miguel's punishment. It was about reclaiming the life he had tried to steal from her. Long after Miguel Salazar was locked away, the echoes of his crime lingered. Her case became a catalyst sparking conversations across Tegucigalpa about the everyday dangers women face and the invisible predators hiding in plain sight. The city began to wake up. People paid more attention. They reported suspicious behavior instead of brushing it off. For Carolina, life would never return to what it once was, but she refused to let fear define her. She transformed her trauma into advocacy, becoming a voice for survivors. She told her story not as a victim, but as a woman who had endured the unimaginable and emerged unbroken. And though the memory of her darkest days would always remain, she chose to live in the light of what she still had not, in the shadow of what had been taken. Case 6. The Kidnapping of Clara Menendez, Madrid. 1998. In 1998, the streets of Madrid pulsed with energy. From the buzzing Gran Via to the narrow alleys of its historic barrios. The Spanish capital was a city that never truly slept. Among the millions who passed through it, locals, tourists, dreamers, there was a man named Rafael Cardegas, whose name would soon become synonymous with fear. To the public, Rafael seemed respectable, a clean-cut businessman running a chain of auto repair shops, always well-dressed and unnervingly polite. But beneath that polished exterior lay a man riddled with secrets. His past was a patchwork of fraud, extortion, and whispered ties to organized crime. He had links to underground gambling, money laundering rings, and people who could make problems disappear for the right price. And now, he was drowning in debts that business alone couldn't settle. When he learned of Clara Menendez, a 22-year-old university student and the daughter of powerful banking executive Emilio Menendez, he saw not a person, but a way out. Clara lived a carefully structured life. Lectures in the morning, study sessions in the afternoon, and dinners with friends in the city center. Her routines were consistent, her habits predictable. She was the perfect target. Rafael spent weeks watching her, tracking her schedule, studying her interactions. He knew her family had money and he was determined to extract every last coin. But he wasn't working alone. A small, ruthless crew of criminals he had worked with for years, men who specialized in abductions and extortion, would help him carry it out. Except this time, it wasn't just about the money. For Rafael, this was about control, about proving he could manipulate the powerful just as easily as he had controlled the desperate. On the night of May 4th, Clara was walking home from a late dinner with friends near Plaza Mayor. The streets were unusually quiet. The few cars that passed barely slowed down. She was only a block from her apartment when a black van pulled up beside her. Before she could scream, the sliding door flew open. Two masked men grabbed her and dragged her inside. The van sped off into the night. By morning, her parents knew something was wrong. When Clara didn't answer calls or show up for class, panic set in. The Menendez family immediately contacted the police. Within hours, an investigation was underway. Madrid was no stranger to crime, but a high-profile kidnapping in the heart of the city was rare. Even more disturbing, there were no witnesses, no camera footage, and no trace of Clara. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. 5 agonizing days passed in silence. Then the call came. A distorted voice, low and deliberate, demanded 5 million pesetas for Clara's safe return. No police, no negotiations. If the family didn't comply, she would disappear forever. But Rafael hadn't anticipated how carefully the Menendez family would operate. There were no public pleas, no emotional press conferences. Emilio Menendez was a man who didn't panic, and the police, rather than act rashly, moved with calculated precision. Meanwhile, Clara was trapped. She was being held in a locked basement on the outskirts of Madrid, somewhere far from the reach of city lights. The air was damp and heavy, the floor cold and unforgiving. There were no windows, no clocks, just silence, interrupted by the creak of floorboards above her. She was terrified, hungry, and exhausted, but not helpless. Despite the horror of her situation, Clara stayed alert. She listened to every sound, every footstep, every voice. Her captors had grown careless. They spoke openly around her, assuming she was too broken to pay attention. But Clara was listening. She picked up a name: Javier. He was the one who brought food, stale bread and water, left quietly at the top of the stairs. He never spoke to her, but he wasn't cruel. And in that silence, Clara sensed something, a flicker of hesitation, a weakness. If she could connect with him, she might have a way out. Back at police headquarters, the investigation was intensifying. The ransom call had been traced. Though the kidnapper used a voice distorter, forensic analysts were able to detect faint background sounds, the hum of an old refrigerator, the rustle of leaves, even the distant chirp of crickets. It was enough. Police narrowed the location to rural properties just outside Madrid, particularly those with old electrical wiring and signs of recent, unregistered activity. The net was closing in, and Clara, still locked in darkness, was running out of time. Case 6. The abduction of Clara Menendez. Clara Menendez had been missing for 7 harrowing days. Her captor, Rafael Cardis, once calm and composed, was beginning to unravel. He had issued an ultimatum to her wealthy family: pay the ransom or she dies. This wasn't Rafael's first kidnapping, but something about Clara disturbed him deeply. She wasn't like the others. She didn't beg. She didn't cry. She didn't even scream. She sat in silence, watching, studying him, and that silence wasn't submission. It was warning. What Rafael didn't know was that the Menendez family had no intention of playing by his rules. Instead of blindly obeying his demands, they activated their network: powerful business associates, old political ties, and covert law enforcement allies. A ransom drop was arranged, but it was a decoy. The real objective: to trace whoever retrieved the money and follow the trail to Clara. Inside the abandoned farmhouse where she was held, Clara could feel a shift in the air. She knew her time was running out. That night, when Javier, the quietest of her captors, brought in her food, she spoke for the first time in days. Her voice was raw, barely more than a whisper, but her words struck deep. She told him she knew his name, that he wasn't like the others. She saw hesitation in him, doubt, and she leaned into it, planting a seed of guilt, of humanity, in a man who had lost both. Outside, law enforcement had begun the final phase of the operation. A surveillance team had tracked a suspicious vehicle, tied to one of Rafael's associates, making repeat trips to the countryside. Lead investigator Gabriel Sanchez had spent the last 48 hours piecing together the web, waiting for the right moment to strike. Clara, meanwhile, had been using every ounce of her strength to stay sharp. She memorized their routines, the sound of footsteps overhead, the creak in the floorboards, the schedule of when they checked on her. Most importantly, she focused on Javier. He averted his gaze, hesitated before locking her door, and left. Meals in silence. She knew he was the weak link. When Javier came back that morning, something had changed. His hands trembled. His breathing was shaky. He lingered for a moment longer than usual, and in that moment, Clara knew her words had found their way into him. He was breaking. Back at the farmhouse perimeter, unmarked police units were in position. Gabriel Sanchez had anticipated every move Rafael might make. He knew Cardis wasn't reckless, but he was paranoid, and if he suspected something was wrong, he'd bolt. And that's exactly what happened. As the arranged ransom exchange played out at a remote location, Rafael watched from a distance. Something felt off. No obvious signs of police. No helicopters. but years in the business had sharpened his instincts, and when a message lit up his phone, "Javier is missing," his blood ran cold. Javier had either run or flipped, and if he had flipped, the police were already closing in. Inside the farmhouse, Clara heard the commotion, rushed footsteps, slamming doors, shouts in a language too muffled to understand. Then the basement door creaked open, but it wasn't Javier. A man she'd never seen stood in the doorway, gun in hand. She braced herself for the worst. But before he could approach, a voice echoed from above. "Písale, monos. Arriba. Go. Go. They're up top." Gunfire erupted. Chaos tore through the building. Police had launched their raid with precision and force. Raphael's men fought back, but they were overwhelmed. Raphael himself made a final, desperate escape. In the basement, Clara could hear it, all the shouts, the shots, the scuffle. Then, the door burst open once more. But this time, it wasn't a captor. It was a police officer. She collapsed into their arms, exhausted, dehydrated, shackled, but alive. Clara Menendez had survived. As for Rafael Cardis, he vanished before they could apprehend him. He slipped into the night, leaving behind his criminal empire in ruins. But his freedom would be short-lived. His face and name were soon plastered across every international watch list. His world was gone, and there was nowhere left for him to hide. For Clara, the ordeal was over, but the trauma both seen and unseen would linger. She had stared into the eyes of evil and refused to break, and as she stepped into the morning light, rescued and reborn, she made herself a promise. She would never be a victim again. Case 7. The Kidnapping of Lucia Gonzalez San Salvador, 2004, by the time Salvador El Lobo Meta reached his 40s. He had turned kidnapping into a calculated business, specializing in ransom operations. Meta had a background in logistics. He knew how to move people and money without leaving a trace. His operations were surgical, his planning meticulous. He never acted on impulse. Every abduction was the result of months of surveillance. He studied his victims' patterns, weaknesses, and routines with the patience of a hunter. And in the spring of 2004, his sights landed on a new target, 22-year-old Lucia Gonzalez. Lucia was a law student at one of San Salvador's most prestigious universities. Born into a prominent family of attorneys, she had a future carved in influence, wealth, and potential. But privilege often paints a target hand. Lucia had no idea she was being watched. For weeks, Meta tracked her every move. He knew what time she left for class, where she had lunch, which parking space she used, and even the layout of her family's home. He wasn't just planning a kidnapping. He was preparing for a flawless extraction, and on June 10th, he made his move. Lucia had just finished her final class of the day and was heading toward her car in the university parking lot. She never saw it coming. A dark van pulled up beside her. The side door slid open, fast and smooth. Two men jumped out. Before she could scream, one clamped a hand over her mouth. In seconds, she was inside. The door slammed shut. The van sped away, leaving behind a drop phone and the contents of her bag scattered across the pavement. The entire abduction lasted under 10 seconds. Campus security arrived minutes later. Surveillance cameras captured only blurry footage. The van had no plates. Witnesses were too stunned to react, and Lucia Gonzalez had vanished. Her family was devastated. They contacted the police and hired private investigators. But in a city like San Salvador, where kidnappings were alarmingly common, resources were stretched thin. And Meta, he had planned for that too. He knew law enforcement wouldn't have the bandwidth to respond quickly. Lucia had been taken to a location, carefully selected for its isolation, an abandoned slaughterhouse on the edge of the city. Once a meat processing plant, it had long since fallen into decades, rusted hooks and blood-stained walls, now repurposed for far darker purposes. The smell of mildew, Gasoline and rust choked the air. It was cold, dark, and damp, a place where people could vanish without a sound. Lucia woke up bound and gagged, lying on the concrete floor. Her wrists and ankles were tied so tightly that rope cut into her skin. A single flickering light above cast eerie shadows across the walls. And standing in the corner, silent and unmoving, was a man known only as El Sombra, the Shadow, one of Meta's most loyal enforcers. He didn't speak, he didn't blink, he just watched. Hours passed. Then the door creaked open. Footsteps echoed down the hallway, slow, deliberate. A figure stepped into the light, dark clothing, a low hat hiding his face. It was him, Salvador Metta. Unlike common kidnappers, Meta didn't rush into negotiations. He treated each abduction like a business transaction. He waited, letting panic sink in before reaching out. It wasn't until 12 hours after Lucia disappeared that the Gonzalez family's phone rang. The call came from an untraceable number. The voice on the other end was calm, professional. There were no threats, no theatrics, just the terms. $500,000, no police, no press, no tricks. The family had 48 hours to comply. The sum was staggering even for a family of means, but the message was clear. Meta wasn't just demanding money, he was asserting power, reminding San Salvador's elite that even their wealth couldn't shield them from his reach. Roberto Gonzalez, Lucia's father, was a senior attorney with ties to the government. He had spent his life battling corruption, but even he knew men like Meta operated beyond the reach of law. If he involved the police, it could cost his daughter her life. And so, he was forced to make an impossible choice, negotiate with a ghost or risk everything. Meanwhile, Lucia remained trapped in a waking nightmare. She was kept barely alive, fed small portions of stale food and dirty water. No one spoke to her. No one answered her cries. She was isolated, disoriented, afraid. The hours blurred together. Then one night, she heard something new, raised voices, an argument, just outside the room. Her heart raced. Were they fighting about her? Was someone losing control? Was help closer than she thought? It was the first shift in the air since her abduction, and it wouldn't be the last. Because what Meta didn't know, what he never accounted for, was that Roberto Gonzalez wasn't just a desperate father. He was preparing a counterstrike. Footsteps rushed across the concrete. Something was wrong. Lucia didn't know it yet, but Meta's perfect plan was starting to fall apart. She held her breath as the voices outside grew louder, an argument, sharp and tense. She couldn't make out the words, but the urgency in their tones chilled her. Something had gone sideways. Meta's men were trained professionals, mercenaries, not street-level criminals. Discipline was the rule. So if they were fighting among themselves, it could mean only one thing. Someone was getting cold feet, or someone was trying to change the deal. Suddenly, the door to the slaughterhouse burst open. Heavy boots pounded against the floor. Lucia heard ragged breathings, someone pacing, then a voice, deep and furious, broke the silence. She shut her eyes tightly, bracing for the worst. Unknown to Lucia, Meta's criminal empire was fracturing. One of his own, named Carlos Ortega, known on the streets as El Lobo, had been secretly working with a rival gang. Ortega had grown tired of taking orders while Meta hoarded the wealth. He wanted power. He wanted control. And now, he saw an opportunity. For months, Ortega had been leaking intel to a powerful cartel, waiting for the right moment to strike. The kidnapping of Lucia Gonzalez had given them the perfect opening. Meta had sensed betrayal, but he had no idea just how deep it ran. Now, his entire empire teetered on the edge. The voices outside turned more aggressive. Then a single gunshot. Lucia's body froze. Something heavy hit the floor. Silence fell, thick and suffocating. The door creaked open. A shadow filled the doorway. A blade glinted in the dim light and slashed through her restraints. Then, a rough hand yanked her up. It was Ortega, but he hadn't come to save her. Meta was dead and Ortega was now in charge. Lucia was just another asset, a bargaining chip. Dragging her outside, Ortega shoved her into a waiting vehicle. The humid night air of San Salvador pressed in around her. As the van sped away, city lights twinkled in the distance, a cruel reminder of the life she'd been torn from. They didn't take her far. After weaving through alleys and unmarked paths, the van pulled up to an abandoned motel on the outskirts of the city. Inside, the air reeked of mildew and decay. Graffiti covered the walls. Debris littered the floor. Ortega shoved her into a chair and pulled out his phone. The new ransom demand, $1 million, double the original ask. Roberto Gonzalez, desperate and terrified, had already scraped together $500,000. Now Ortega was pushing him to the edge, but this time, Roberto made a different choice. Ecale de Unidad Especializada contra el Crimen Organizado, El Salvador Silit, Anti-Crime Task Force. These weren't corrupt cops. These were professionals. They hatched a plan. The exchange would take place at a deserted warehouse near the docks. Ortega, confident in his control, agreed. Lucia, still bound and exhausted, was loaded into another van. She could feel the tension among Ortega's men. None of them knew. They were heading straight into an ambush. The warehouse loomed in the dark, lit only by flickering overhead lights. In the center stood Roberto, clutching a briefcase full of cash. Ortega strode forward, smug and overconfident. He gave the order, "Bring her out." But before the deal could be completed, chaos erupted. From the shadows, Unidad agents sprang into action. Gunfire shattered the silence. Ortega's men dove for cover, but they were outnumbered, outgunned. Lucia dropped to the floor, heart pounding, bullets slicing through the air. Hands grabbed her, dragging her to safety. Officers shouted. Men screamed. Then silence. Carlos. Ortega lay bleeding on the concrete. His plan, his ambition dead with him. Lucia Gonzalez was finally free. She collapsed into her father's arms, sobbing. The nightmare was over. The ransom was recovered. But to Roberto, it no longer mattered. His daughter was alive. That was enough. In the weeks that followed, the remnants of Meta's organization fell apart. Some fled. Others were arrested. But the message rang clear. San Salvador would no longer be ruled by fear. Lucia never spoke publicly about what happened. The trauma stayed with her, lingering in the shadows of her memory. But she refused to let it define her. She had survived and that was enough. Case 8. The Crypto King and the $8.5 billion lie in the late 2010s, as cryptocurrency exploded in popularity. A man named Jonathan J.B. Whitmore emerged as one of the industry's rising stars. Charismatic, brilliant, and media savvy, Whitmore was the founder and CEO of Nexa Capital, a blockchain financial firm promising to revolutionize the digital economy. Raised in an affluent suburb of San Francisco, Whitmore was always steps ahead of his peers. By 22, he had graduated from MIT with dual degrees in AI and financial engineering. By 25, he was already a millionaire, thanks to a successful AI trading bot. But his biggest move came in 2017. That year, he launched Nexa Capital and introduced NX Tokona cryptocurrency he claimed would serve as the foundation of a decentralized, fully autonomous financial ecosystem. Investors were hooked. From Silicon Valley to Singapore, money poured in. By 2019, Nexa Capital had raised billions. Whitmore was hailed as a visionary, often compared to Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. He graced the stages of major financial conferences, rubbed shoulders with celebrities, and attracted endorsements from major venture capitalists. But behind the scenes, it was all a lie. Nexa Capital was nothing more than a high-tech Ponzi scheme. By late 2020, cracks began to show. Auditors couldn't verify the firm's claimed assets. Despite reports of record growth, the numbers didn't add up. Then came the leaks. Whistleblowers inside Nexa released documents showing that Whitmore and his top brass were funneling investor money into offshore accounts. Yet the scam continued for months. Whitmore kept up the illusion with flashy press releases, fake product launches, and influencer endorsements. All the while, he was living large, buying mansions, private jets, and luxury cars on the backs of his investors. In mid-2021, the SEC launched an investigation after an anonymous insider revealed the truth. Nexa Capital had no real blockchain infrastructure. NX token was backed by nothing. New investor funds were being used to pay off old ones. It was classic fraud repackaged for the crypto age. Faced with prison, Whitmore didn't stick around. He fled the US, taking hundreds of millions in Bitcoin and Ethereum with him. An international manhunt began. Rumors swirled. Some said he was hiding in Dubai. Others claimed he was hopping through Eastern Europe, using burner phones and crypto wallets to stay ahead of the law. By early 2022, Nexa Capital collapsed. Total investor losses, $8.5 billion. Whitmore became known as the crypto king of fraud, a modern-day con artist who exploited the hype of digital finance to orchestrate one of the largest scams in history. As of today, Jonathan Whitmore remains at large. His story is a cautionary tale in a world driven by hype, greed, and unchecked ambition. Cryptocurrency fraud case. Jonathan Jace Whitmore. It was the largest cryptocurrency fraud in U.S. history. From casual traders to major institutional investors, thousands were left financially devastated. Some had lost their entire life savings. But one question haunted everyone. Where was Jace Whitmore? For nearly a year, Jonathan Jace Whitmore vanished without a trace. His last known location was a luxury villa on the outskirts of Dubai. But by the time authorities raided the estate, Whitmore was gone. Inside, they found state-of-the-art electronics, fake passports, and multiple encrypted laptops, but not the man himself. As global law enforcement scrambled for answers, the world watched in disbelief. One of the most notorious financial criminals of modern times had slipped through international cracks. Aided by over $8.5 billion in stolen funds and the anonymity of decentralized cryptocurrency wallets, these digital vaults proved nearly impossible to track or penetrate. Rumors spread wildly. Some claimed he was hiding in Eastern Europe, Montenegro, Serbia, where extradition laws were lenient. Others were convinced he had disappeared to a remote Caribbean island, using his fortune to buy silence and protection from corrupt officials. Meanwhile, back in the United States, the collapse of Nexa Capital left behind shattered lives. Investors had lost everything. Many had drained retirement accounts. Others had gone into debt, lured by Whitmore's promises of unprecedented wealth. Class action lawsuits piled up against Nexa Capital's remaining executives. But without the mastermind himself, justice felt like a distant hope. Then came a turning point. The FBI, SEC, and Interpol launched a global manhunt. Whitmore was added to the FBI's most wanted list, and a $25 million bounty, the largest ever for a financial fugitive, was placed on his capture. Investigators pored over blockchain transactions, decrypted old communications, and questioned former insiders. For months, they found nothing. Then, in August 2022, a small but critical breakthrough, a dormant crypto wallet linked to Whitmore, suddenly came alive with a $500 Bitcoin transaction. It wasn't the amount that mattered, it was the activity. The signal led authorities to Buenos Aires, Argentina, a known financial hub. Believing Whitmore was still laundering money through middlemen, the FBI dispatched a task force. Agents embedded themselves in elite social circles, monitoring luxury rentals, yacht bookings, and exclusive hotel check-ins. And then September 2022, they caught a break. A private airport security camera captured a familiar figure boarding a chartered jet. He wore a fake beard and sunglasses, but investigators recognized the posture, the mannerisms. It was him. The jet was flying to São Paulo, Brazil. Brazilian authorities, working closely with Interpol, prepared for his arrival. When the aircraft landed, officers surrounded the strip, weapons drawn. Passengers exited one by one. Then came a tall man in an expensive suit. When they pulled off his sunglasses, there was no doubt. Jonathan Whitmore had finally been caught. His arrest sent shockwaves around the world. The man who had outwitted law enforcement, robbed millions, and vanished into thin air for nearly 2 years, was now in custody. Outside the courthouse in São Paulo, crowds gathered. News stations played the footage on loop. Back in the US, the victims of Nexa Capital finally saw the beginnings of justice. But Whitmore wasn't about to go down easily. His elite legal team paid from his remaining hidden fortune, mounted an aggressive defense. They argued that cryptocurrency laws were ambiguous and that Nexa Capital operated in a legal gray zone. They framed the prosecution as politically motivated an attempt to make an example of him. The legal battle that followed was one of the most complex financial trials in U.S. history. In October 2022, Whitmore was extradited to the U.S. under heavy security. Shackled, flanked by agents, the once lavish crypto king now wore a government-issued jumpsuit. The Department of Justice moved fast, charging him with wire fraud, securities fraud, conspiracy to commit money laundering, and more. Investigators had overwhelming evidence, thousands of emails, fake contracts, and testimony from ex-employees who had turned on him. But despite the damning evidence, Whitmore wasn't done playing the game. His lawyers flooded the courts with motions, delaying the trial for months. Meanwhile, federal agents and forensic accountants were still trying to locate the rest of the money. By early 2023, only $3.2 billion of the estimated $8.5 billion had been recovered. The rest had seemingly vanished. Investigators scoured offshore accounts, shell companies, and privacy-focused cryptocurrencies like Monero and Zcash. Worse still, suspicious microtransactions began appearing across Bitcoin wallets previously linked to Whitmore. The transfers were small and fragmented deliberately, designed to avoid detection. Someone was still moving his money, the FBI believed. Whitmore had created a detailed roadmap for trusted associates, ensuring his wealth remained hidden even if he was locked away. Then, in April 2023, a twist. An anonymous informant came forward offering critical information in exchange for immunity. They revealed that part of Whitmore's fortune was stashed in crypto wallets managed by his network in Hong Kong and the United Arab Emirates. Authorities tested the encryption keys provided and successfully unlocked $200 million in Bitcoin. It was a breakthrough, but also a warning. If this was just a fraction of what he'd hidden, how much more was still out there? By the summer of 2023, all eyes were on New York City as Whitmore's trial began. News outlets broadcasted live updates. Legal experts debated in real time. The prosecution laid out its case, clear, devastating, and damning. But beneath all the courtroom drama, one chilling truth remained. Jonathan Whitmore may have been behind bars, but the billions he stole still lingered in the shadows of the blockchain waiting. Case 8. Jonathan Whitmore and Nexa Capital. The tech illusion. Whitmore, the charismatic founder of Nexa Capital, promised investors a revolution in crypto. But beneath the glossy branding and ambitious white papers was something far more sinister. A sophisticated Ponzi scheme masked as innovation. Former Nexa employees later testified that the company's success had been nothing but smoke and mirrors. Investors thought they were earning profits, but in reality, Whitmore was simply recycling funds, using new deposits to pay returns to earlier backers. The illusion was airtight until it WASN's single quotes, T. Despite overwhelming evidence, Whitmore's legal team mounted an aggressive defense. They attempted to discredit witness testimony, challenged the forensic analysis, and leaned heavily on the legal gray areas and crypto regulation. Their argument was simple. Investors knew the risks, and Nexa Capital was just another high-risk tech venture in a volatile market. But the jury wasn't convinced. After 2 weeks of deliberation and the review of thousands of pages of evidence, they returned a unanimous verdict. On October 17, 2023, Whitmore was found guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to 245 years in federal prison, ensuring he would never walk free again. His remaining assets were seized, and Nexa Capital was declared defunct. Still, one chilling mystery remains. Where is the rest of the money? Even after the conviction, investigators continued chasing the missing billions. Many believe the full amount may never be recovered. Whitmore's downfall became a cautionary tale of unchecked ambition, manipulation, and the darker side of digital finance. Somewhere in the depths of the internet, his hidden fortune may still be waiting. Case 9. Do Kwon and the Terra Collapse. A vision built on sand in the fast-moving world of cryptocurrency. Few figures rose and fell as dramatically as Do Kwon, the South Korean entrepreneur behind Terraform Labs, co-founding the company in 2018. Kwon's mission was audacious: to create a decentralized financial system that could rival traditional banking. At the heart of this vision were two digital assets: TerraUSD, an algorithmic stablecoin pegged 1-to-1 to the US dollar, and Luna, its volatile sister token. Together, they promised both stability and high returns, quickly gaining massive popularity. By early 2022, Luna had reached a staggering high of $119.51, and Terraform Labs was celebrated as a crypto success story. But beneath the hype lurked a structural flaw. USD wasn't backed by tangible assets. Instead, it relied on an algorithm tied to Luna. When USD's price drifted, the system would mint or burn Luna to bring it back to its pega mechanism, entirely dependent on market confidence. That confidence shattered in May 2022. A wave of large withdrawals from Anchor Ptula lending platform, offering a seemingly absurd 20% yield on us, triggered a panic. As investors rushed to exit, the algorithm faltered. UST lost its peg. Luna began to crash, and in a matter of days, $40 billion in market value evaporated. Investigations quickly revealed that Kwon and Terraform Labs had misled investors, falsely claiming the stablecoin was backed by robust mechanisms and tangible reserves. As lawsuits mounted, Kwon vanished. By the time South Korean authorities issued an arrest warrant, he had fled the country, using his wealth and connections to evade capture. For months, his whereabouts were unknown till March 2023, when he was arrested in Montenegro trying to board a private jet with forged documents. After serving a short sentence for document fraud, he was extradited to the US in December 2024. Kwon now faces multiple charges, including securities fraud, wire fraud, commodities fraud, and conspiracy to defraud investors. In a separate civil case, a US jury found both Terraform Labs and Kwon liable, ordering them to pay over $4.5 billion in damages. The collapse of TerraUSD and Luna sent shockwaves across the financial world. What was once seen as a model of innovation became the poster child for recklessness and deception. Regulators worldwide have since increased scrutiny of algorithmic stablecoins and crypto markets at large. Once hailed as a visionary, Do Kwon now stands accused of orchestrating one of the most catastrophic failures in cryptocurrency history, a collapse that wiped out fortunes, shattered trust, and forced a global reckoning in the digital finance landscape. Montenegro authorities detained Do Kwon on charges of document forgery, but that was only the beginning. Both the United States and South Korea were vying for his extradition, while the victims of the TerraUSD collapse demanded justice. Thousands had lost everything from everyday retail investors to large hedge funds that had poured millions into what they believed was the future of finance. As the legal proceedings dragged on, lawsuits piled up. Each one accused Kwon of orchestrating one of the most significant financial frauds in modern history. Despite the mounting allegations, Kwon maintained his innocence. Through statements released by his legal team, he claimed Terra's collapse was a tragic result of market volatility, not deliberate deception. According to him, it was a downturn, not a scheme, but internal communications told a different story. Leaked messages and company records revealed that executives at Terraform Labs had long known about critical vulnerabilities. By December 2024, Montenegro had approved Kwon's extradition to the United States, where he faced a long list of federal charges: securities fraud, wire fraud, commodities fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. This case would become one of the most high-profile financial prosecutions of the decade. Alongside the criminal charges, Kwon and Terraform Labs also faced a barrage of civil suits. In a landmark judgment, the SEC secured a $4.5 billion penalty against them, one of the largest in cryptocurrency history. The verdict sent shockwaves through the digital asset industry, spurring urgent calls for regulation. Governments around the globe introduced new oversight policies, especially for algorithmic stablecoins. The European Union fast-tracked its markets in crypto assets MiCA regulation, while the US proposed strict new requirements for reserve transparency and consumer protection. But for Terra's investors, the reforms came too late. Many had staked their savings, retirement funds, and even borrowed money based on Kwon's promises of financial freedom. What they got instead was ruin. Stories flooded the media: families losing homes, businesses shuttering, lives unraveling. As 2025 began, Kwon's legal battle reached a fever pitch. Extradited to the US after months of legal delays, he stood trial in a packed New York federal courtroom. The prosecution came armed with a mountain of evidence: internal emails, investor testimonies, financial records, all painting a chilling picture of deliberate deception. They claimed Kwon had knowingly misled the public about Terra USD's stability. While publicly touting its reliability, he privately acknowledged the system's fragility. In one damning email, he allegedly admitted that if confidence in Terra USD faltered, the entire system would crash within days. But instead of addressing the flaws, Kwon doubled down. He ridiculed critics and ramped up marketing, encouraging even more people to invest. Prosecutors called him a financial predator, saying he knowingly lured in investors with false assurances. Victims took the stand, one by one. They spoke of wiped-out life savings, mounting debt, and lives left in tatters. Some had taken out loans. Others had invested inheritance money. The emotional toll was devastating. Kwon's defense tried to flip the narrative. They argued that he was not a fraudster, but a visionary blindsided by market forces. They likened the collapse to the 2008 financial crisis, claiming Kwon's actions were reckless, perhaps but not criminal. Then came a bombshell: a former Terraform Labs executive previously protected under a whistleblower agreement. His statements blew holes in Kwon's defense. He claimed the company had artificially propped up Terra USD's peg using secret buybacks and undisclosed investor funds. And Kwon, he was allegedly the one pulling the strings. Worse still, financial records showed that Kwon had withdrawn millions from Terraform Labs in the weeks leading up to the collapse. The money had been funneled into offshore accounts, evidence suggesting he had secured his own financial safety, while investors faced total loss. The defense tried to discredit the whistleblower, portraying him as a disgruntled former employee, but prosecutors backed his claims with irrefutable documentation. After months of testimony, the jury reached a verdict in less than 3 days. On all major counts: securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy, Kwon was found guilty. As the verdict was read, Kwon showed no reaction. The once defiant crypto mogul now sat in silence, his gaze fixed on the courtroom table. His sentencing would prove just as dramatic. Prosecutors pushed for the maximum, arguing that Kwan's actions had inflicted irreparable harm on thousands of people. The judge agreed. Citing the scale and intentionality of the fraud, he sentenced Kwan to 40 years in federal prison, the harshest penalty ever handed down in a crypto fraud case. As Kwan was led away in handcuffs, the shockwaves continued to ripple through the industry. His downfall marked a turning point in crypto regulation. The SEC implemented sweeping new requirements, effectively banning algorithmic stablecoins like TerraUSD. New rules demanded verified reserves and greater transparency from all digital asset projects. Some victims of the Terra collapse received partial restitution. A $2.3 billion fund, part of Terraform Labs' civil settlement, was established to compensate them. But for most, the damage was already done. The payouts were a fraction of what was lost. Former Terraform Labs employees, many of whom had tried to distance themselves from Kwan, now faced intense scrutiny of their own. Kwan's rise and fall became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that in the volatile world of cryptocurrency, promises of financial freedom can quickly turn into financial devastation. His conviction sent a clear message to the industry. Innovation is no excuse for deception, and no one is above the law. Case 9. Do Kwan and the TerraUSD collapse. From crypto visionary to global fugitive. In the aftermath of the TerraUSD collapse, the damage extended far beyond lost billions. Former employees of Terraform Labs faced immense stigma. Many found it nearly impossible to find work in the crypto space. Again, their reputations irreparably damaged by their association with a system that had imploded. The downfall of Terra marked more than a financial failure. It symbolized the end of an era. The once wild, freewheeling world of cryptocurrency, defined by innovation and little oversight, had suddenly been yanked into the spotlight. Governments around the globe tightened regulations. The crypto frontier was no longer lawless. Meanwhile, Do Kwan, once hailed as a tech prodigy, adjusted to life behind bars. The man who had once taunted critics on Twitter with smug arrogance and unwavering confidence had reportedly grown quiet and withdrawn. Former colleagues who visited described him as someone resigned to his fate, yet still unwilling to accept full accountability. In a rare prison interview conducted in 2027, Kwan maintained his innocence. "I believed in Terra. I truly thought it could work. I never meant to defraud anyone." But when asked about whistleblower testimony, covert buybacks, and hidden withdrawals, Kwan fell silent. Moments later, he abruptly ended the interview and walked away from the camera. More questions than answers. Over time, the saga of Do Kwan evolved into a cautionary tale. His name became a case study in business schools, finance classes, and legal debates, a symbol of ambition, unchecked by regulation. Books were written, documentaries aired. Some painted him as a misunderstood genius, others a calculating fraud. For those who lost their life savings in the Terra crash, Kwan's trial offered a sliver of closure, but the damage was irreversible. Financial scars remained a haunting reminder that in the volatile world of cryptocurrency, fortunes can be made and destroyed in the blink of an eye. Case 10. The Lazarus Group and the VaultNet heist. A cyber assault on the heart of crypto. When it comes to cybercrime, few names invoke as much fear and intrigue as the Lazarus Group, an elusive and highly sophisticated, North Korean-backed hacking collective. Lazarus has been linked to some of the most devastating cyber attacks in history, targeting everything from banks and crypto exchanges to national governments. By 2026, Lazarus had firmly cemented its status as the most dangerous cybercrime syndicate on the planet. But that summer, they executed their most audacious operation yet, the largest cryptocurrency heist in U.S. history, shaking the global financial system to its core. The target, VaultNet, a San Francisco-based cryptocurrency exchange, nicknamed the Fort Knox of digital assets. Led by cybersecurity expert Michael Carter, VaultNet was widely considered unbreachable. Its fortress-like infrastructure included multi-layered encryption, biometric authentication, and cold storage protocols, all audited by third-party firms and managed by former FBI and NSA specialists. To the outside world, VaultNet was unshakable. But Lazarus had other plans. Instead of launching a brute force assault, the group took a more insidious route. Over several months, they infiltrated VaultNet's systems by exploiting a vulnerability hidden within its own software. Update mechanism, a backdoor that would grant them access during the exchange's next routine security patch. It was a slow, methodical breach, months in the making. Then, on the night of July 18th, 2026, they struck in a coordinated blitz. Lazarus drained VaultNet's hot wallets, those connected to the internet for fast transactions. In mere minutes, over $4.2 billion in Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other tokens vanished into the blockchain. VaultNet's security team responded instantly, but it was too late. The attackers used advanced laundering techniques like chain hopping rapidly, moving funds across multiple cryptocurrencies and blockchains, and funneled assets through mixing services and decentralized exchanges, making the money nearly impossible to trace. Though VaultNet's cold wallets remained untouched, the damage was catastrophic. Thousands of users awoke to find their assets gone. Chaos rippled through the markets. Within 24 hours, Bitcoin dropped 18%, Ethereum fell 22%, investor confidence plummeted to an all-time low. The U.S. government declared the incident a national security threat. A joint task force operation, Shadow Trace, was launched, combining the efforts of the FBI, NSA, DOJ, and international partners. Blockchain analysts worked around the clock to trace the stolen funds and monitored dark web forums for any activity related to the hack. Soon, they discovered a critical clue. A portion of the stolen crypto had been funneled through Tornado Cassia, notorious mixer previously sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury for aiding money laundering. The malware used in the hack bore unmistakable similarities to past Lazarus operations, including the 2016 Bangladesh bank hack and the 2022 Ronin Bridge attack. The evidence was clear. Lazarus was behind the VaultNet heist. In response, President Daniel Hayes signed Executive Order 13,982, freezing all North Korean-linked crypto assets and sanctioning any entity found aiding the Lazarus Group. The Treasury Department pressured global exchanges to blacklist all known Lazarus wallets. Despite these sweeping actions, much of the $4.2 billion remains unrecovered, hidden in the anonymous sprawl of the blockchain. The VaultNet breach exposed a harrowing truth. In the digital age, no system is truly impenetrable, and with state-sponsored groups like Lazarus pushing the boundaries of cyber warfare, the next attack may not just be financial, it could be geopolitical. The VaultNet heist. A digital war begins. In the wake of the VaultNet cyber heist, U.S. Cyber Command launched covert counteroffensive operations against the Lazarus Group, a North Korean-backed cybercrime syndicate known for their surgical precision and ruthless attacks. While the details remain classified, intelligence leaks suggest that American cyber forces managed to disable several North Korean servers, temporarily disrupting Lazarus operations. But Lazarus was not so easily silenced. Though a small portion of the stolen funds was recovered, the majority vanished, spread across thousands of anonymous wallets and buried deep within decentralized finance protocols. Beyond the reach of law enforcement and regulatory oversight, the VaultNet heist marked a turning point in digital finance. In its aftermath, the Crypto Transparency Act of 2027 was passed, mandating strict Know Your Customer (KYC) procedures for all blockchain-based transactions. Major exchanges rolled out real-time AI-driven fraud detection. Anonymous crypto transactions became a thing of the past. But for VaultNet, the damage was irreversible. Despite attempts to reimburse affected users, public trust was destroyed. Millions fled the platform. Within a year, VaultNet filed for bankruptcy. Michael Carter, once celebrated as a visionary in the crypto world, resigned in disgrace. Lazarus, however, remained untouched, still lurking in the shadows, undefeated, because the heist wasn't just about profit. It was a strategic maneuver designed to fund North Korea's sanctioned economy and to prove that even the most fortified financial systems were vulnerable. In the digital age, money no longer lived in vaults or banks. It existed as code, fragile, exposed, and ripe for exploitation. And Lazarus had proven they knew how to break it. The morning after the VaultNet breach, global finance was in freefall. News outlets ran non-stop coverage, branding it the largest digital robbery in history. Panic spread like wildfire. Investors scrambled to withdraw funds from other platforms, fearing they were next. Crypto markets tanked. Bitcoin plummeted 35% in 48 hours. Ethereum followed. Smaller coins were wiped out entirely. The collapse rippled through Wall Street. Tech stocks with blockchain integrations nosed. Venture capitalists and institutional investors saw their portfolios bleed billions. Under pressure, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission (SEC) had no choice but to act, and at the center of it all stood VaultNet, now brought to its knees. Ground Zero. Inside VaultNet's San Francisco headquarters, chaos reigned. Federal agents were already on site, seizing servers and interrogating staff. Carter, the embattled CEO, stood in a glass-walled conference room, surrounded by his executives and government officials. Despite having some of the most advanced cybersecurity infrastructure in the industry, VaultNet had suffered a catastrophic breach. Carter replayed every decision leading up to the incident, but it was too late. Lawsuits were pouring in. The FBI, SEC, and Treasury Department had launched full-scale investigations. Then came the final blow. VaultNet's banking partners pulled out, freezing liquidity. The exchange was effectively dead. By that afternoon, the company filed for bankruptcy protection. But for the thousands of customers who had lost their life savings overnight, that wasn't enough. They wanted accountability. They wanted justice. Tracking the ghosts, federal investigators and cybersecurity analysts worked around the clock, trying to unravel how $4.2 billion had disappeared without a trace. Lazarus had funneled the stolen assets through thousands of newly created wallets, each holding a fraction of the total sum. Then, using smart contracts and DeFi protocols, they bounced the funds across multiple blockchains, each move designed to obscure the trail. Their most powerful tool, crypto mixers, platforms that blend dirty money with clean assets, making transactions nearly untraceable. But amid the chaos, a single mistake cracked the case open. A transaction overlooked in the initial rush was traced to a server previously flagged by U.S. intelligence, server in North Korea. It was the confirmation. Investigators had been waiting for digital warfare, Operation Silent Web, with Lazarus now formally identified. The U.S. initiated Operation Silent Web, a classified cyber offensive. The White House convened an emergency National Security Council meeting, officially designating the VaultNet hack as an act of economic warfare. President Hayes addressed the nation, stating, "We will pursue these criminals wherever they hide. We will not allow hostile cyber actors to undermine our economy or our national security." Behind closed doors, the Pentagon activated elite cyber warfare teams under U.S. Cyber Command and the NSA. Their mission: infiltrate, disrupt, and dismantle Lazarus infrastructure before they could strike again. But Lazarus struck first. The retaliations, just as federal agents began tracing the stolen funds. Another attack hit, this time targeting the Federal Reserve's real-time payment systems. For 30 agonizing minutes, the financial lifeblood of the U.S. was paralyzed. No money moved, no payments cleared, though no funds were stolen. The disruption alone triggered panic. The stock market plunged. Banks delayed transactions. The entire system felt fragile. The message was clear. Lazarus wasn't just a band of hackers. They were digital warriors, armed with zero-day exploits, AI-driven malware, and military-grade encryption, and they were capable of economic sabotage on a national scale. The global U.S. faced an impossible dilemma. Lazarus operated from within North Korea, a country that shielded its cyber units as part of its intelligence and military apparatus. Direct military retaliation risked a geopolitical crisis, but inaction risked continued economic disruption. So the U.S. turned to its greatest leverage, the global financial system. The Treasury Department unleashed the harshest sanctions in history, freezing assets, blacklisting crypto platforms suspected of collusion, and choking off Lazarus from financial lifelines. Meanwhile, law enforcement across Europe and Asia began arresting underground money launderers, darknet brokers, and crypto shell companies. The crackdown was unprecedented. Still, Lazarus remained elusive. The breakthrough then came, a critical turning point. A private cybersecurity firm uncovered a vulnerability in a Lazarus-controlled server. Using this backdoor, U.S. cyber operatives infiltrated their network and retrieved terabytes of intelligence malware blueprints, transaction logs, and most critically, real IP addresses tied to several Lazarus members. With this trove of evidence, a multinational task force sprung into action. South Korea, Japan, and several European nations coordinated raids. Several Lazarus operatives were arrested, leading to the first ever criminal convictions of hackers linked to the North Korean regime. And while many key figures remained hidden behind state protection, the myth of Lazarus' invincibility was broken. The new era of AltNet was gone. Michael Carter's name tarnished forever. But the world had changed. The VaultNet heist forced governments, banks, and tech giants to confront a sobering truth. The battlefield of the 21st century is digital, and in that arena, the enemy wears no uniform, crosses no borders, and leaves no fingerprints. They write their legacy in stolen code, shadow wallets, and vanished billions. And somewhere, behind a keyboard in Pyongyang, Lazarus waits, still watching, still hunting, still preparing for their next strike. Disabling Lazarus Group's command centers was a major breakthrough. U.S. cyber operatives had cut off their access to stolen funds, exposed their inner networks, and crippled their ability to operate temporarily. But despite these efforts, the core members of Lazarus remained elusive. The stolen billions were never fully recovered, scattered across thousands of wallets and hidden deep within decentralized platforms and the digital battlefield. Still, as treacherous as ever, though the VaultNet heist had finally been avenged, its consequences rippled far beyond the takedown. The world had crossed a threshold. The age of traditional financial crimes was officially over. In this new era, the greatest threats were faceless, stateless, incapable of bringing down entire economies with nothing but a laptop and a line of code. One thing became clear. Lazarus may have lost the battle, but the war for the future of digital finance was just beginning. The VaultNet heist wasn't just remarkable for its scale, it was a paradigm shift in global financial warfare. No longer was this the domain of petty cybercriminals or rogue traders. This was strategic, coordinated, calculated. The breach revealed weaknesses that regulators, cybersecurity experts, and intelligence agencies had feared for years, but never fully understood. Despite arrests, asset freezes, and international condemnation, Lazarus survived. Their network of shadowy money laundering fronts remained intact. But then, something strange happened. They vanished. No new wallet activity. Chatter on the dark web. No new attacks. Some investigators believed the crackdown had worked, but seasoned analysts knew better. Lazarus wasn't finished. They were regrouping, rebuilding, because in cyber warfare, silence doesn't mean surrender. It means preparation. Weeks later, U.S. intelligence intercepted classified transmissions, indicating that Lazarus was restructuring. Instead of large headline-grabbing heists, they were pivoting to something far more insidious: deeply embedded infiltrations of financial institutions, deployment of AI-powered malware, and even recruitment of insiders within global tech firms. One particularly disturbing report revealed that key Lazarus operatives had been absorbed into North Korea's official cyber warfare divisions. With new identities, state funding, and military-level infrastructure, the game had changed. Lazarus was no longer just a criminal syndicate. They were now a de facto arm of a hostile government, meaning every future attack could be interpreted not as cybercrime, but as cyber warfare. Determined to end the threat, the U.S. expanded its mission. Cyber Command launched Operation Silent Web at full scale, deploying elite white hat operatives to seek out and dismantle what was left of Lazarus's infrastructure. But for every node taken down, a new one appeared. For every compromised server destroyed, another would rise. The resilience was chilling. Then came a devastating revelation. An FBI blockchain analyst discovered that Lazarus was already adapting. They had begun experimenting with artificial intelligence and quantum-resistant cryptography technologies that could make their next financial heists not just effective, but completely untraceable. It was no longer about recovering lost money. This was a warning. Lazarus wasn't hiding. They were evolving. Governments around the world could no longer afford to ignore what had become painfully clear. The future of warfare would not be fought with soldiers and missiles but with data, algorithms, and encryption. The VaultNet heist had marked the beginning, a moment in history when the first shot of the cyber war was fired, and though the exchange collapsed, though justice had been served for some, the threat still lingered. Somewhere, in the shadows of encrypted networks, Lazarus was still watching, still waiting, still planning, because in this world, no cyber war is ever truly won, only delayed. Case 11. The Rise and Ruin of Matthew Caldwell, Australia's biggest financial fraud. Matthew Caldwell was once a name that inspired admiration in Australia's elite financial circles. Born in Sydney in 1972, Caldwell exuded charm, intelligence, and business acumen traits that helped him rapidly ascend the ranks of investment banking in the 1990s. By his mid-30s, he had launched his own hedge fund, Caldwell Capital, promising wealthy investors exclusive access to high-yield, low-risk opportunities. To the public, Caldwell was a financial genius. He owned luxury properties across Sydney and Melbourne, flew in a private jet, and was a regular at high-profile charity events and gala dinners, often mingling with celebrities, politicians, and industry moguls. His hedge fund appeared to thrive on the back of a proprietary trading algorithm, a supposedly cutting-edge tool that he claimed could consistently generate double-digit returns, even during economic downturns. But behind the polished image and persuasive charm was a lie. Caldwell Capital was no financial marvel. It was, in fact, a meticulously orchestrated Ponzi scheme, one of the largest in Australian history. For nearly 20 years, Caldwell lured new investors with promises of guaranteed profits, using their deposits to pay earlier clients and maintain the illusion of success. His fund claimed to specialize in high-frequency trading and arbitrage strategies, designed to dazzle but never explained in depth. The so-called black box trading system was off-limits to everyone outside his tight inner circle. To sell the illusion further, Caldwell hired respected figures from the finance world, former bank executives, analysts, and traders, and flooded financial magazines and conferences with glowing features and ads. He created a cult of exclusivity. There was always a waitlist to invest, and the more unattainable the fund seemed, the more people wanted in. By 2010, Caldwell Capital claimed to manage over $3.7 billion in assets. But in reality, there were no algorithms, no high-frequency trades, just fraudulent accounting and endless deception. Caldwell used investor funds to fuel a life of extreme opulence, mega yachts, private islands, penthouse apartments, and luxury getaways. As long as new money kept coming in, the illusion held. But in 2015, global market instability triggered a slowdown in new investments. Longtime clients began requesting withdrawals, and the scheme began to crack, desperate to stay afloat. Caldwell made increasingly wild claims, offering risk-free investments backed by fictitious assets. But regulators and industry veterans started to grow suspicious. By 2017, the Australian Securities and Investments Commission (ASIC) was investigating. Their probe intensified after a whistleblower, one of Caldwell's former employees, handed over incriminating internal documents showing fabricated returns and false trading records. As the truth emerged, panic gripped Caldwell's investors. Many attempted to pull their funds, but Caldwell stalled, blaming temporary liquidity issues. Behind the scenes, the house of cards was collapsing. In early 2019, the inevitable happened. Authorities conducted a high-profile raid on Caldwell's Sydney mansion, seizing millions in luxury assets and arresting him on multiple charges including securities fraud, financial deception, and money laundering. His trial was one of the most watched in Australian financial history. Despite Caldwell's claims that his strategy was real and that his fund was merely going through a rough patch, the evidence was undeniable. Billions were missing. Thousands had been defrauded in 2020. Matthew Caldwell was found guilty on 17 counts of fraud and sentenced to 25 years in prison. The fallout was catastrophic. Families lost life savings. Retirees were left destitute, and institutions faced financial ruin. Today, Caldwell's name is etched in infamous, synonymous with betrayal and financial fraud. His story stands as a stark reminder of the dangers of blind trust, the seduction of unrealistic returns, and the devastating human cost of financial deception. Though tighter regulations have since been introduced, for many of Caldwell's victims, the wounds remain.